Today, we're going to take a look at the Avanti airbrush that is sold at Harbor Freight. Been hearing a little bit about it, seeing it a couple different places, so I thought I would take a look at it myself and let you guys know what I think. To start with, it comes in a pretty nice box, pretty well packaged. Nothing to complain about there. Okay, so I first got interested in checking out this airbrush by the Art Workshop's review of this, which they do a great job over there at the Art Workshop, another airbrush channel. And he had mentioned how the nozzle was like the Eclipse nozzle, and that made me interested to actually go ahead and get one of these. However, this is the Eclipse nozzle on the left, and this is the one that comes out of the Avanti on the right. As you can tell, they will not interchange with each other, and the similarities are really close, but they're definitely not a match. This is looking at the inside of the nozzle of the Avanti underneath a digital microscope. And as you can see here, probably if you barely see, is how much thread is exposed to the inside of that nozzle. And that is forgivable, but it can be a problem because it's going to create more problems with paint building up inside of it. And when I first took this airbrush apart, it was covered in a lot of oil and grease. However, once I wiped the grease off, here's the good news. This is probably one of the best needles I've seen come out. It is definitely the best needle I've seen come out of a Chinese airbrush, but it's one of the best needles I've seen overall. So it's better than many airbrushes I've seen. You can see even under the digital microscope. I've not done anything to polish that. That is as it came out from the factory. Now I want to start putting this jack together. We'll talk about build quality a little bit. As I put the air valve in here, maybe you guys can hear that, but I will say that's pretty bad. The machining on where that air valve threads in the body, but you know, that happens quite often with Chinese airbrushes. You know, and it's something that usually can be forgiven when you're dealing with a certain price point. The needle being as flat like that and thin with no kind of bevel on it, or the trigger rather, I'm not real big fan of that, but I can't really fault it for that. It's not good, but it's, you know, serviceable. And, you know, that's another one of those things that you could overlook. Now, when the Art Workshop went to put the barrel assembly back inside the airbrush, he mentioned it getting stuck and not wanting to go through. And I also am having that same problem. And clearly, most of you guys know, I've put together and taken apart a lot of airbrushes. I was able to get it without having to jam the threads, but I did have to wiggle it around a lot. But I'm going to say this. The overall build quality of all of these parts here is among the worst I've seen in quite a few years from any airbrush manufacturer. Actually, it's the worst I've seen in a really long time. As most Chinese manufacturers have quality have gotten better, you see how much wiggle and slop we got going on here. This is this is pretty bad here. So it shocks me that the needle was so well taken care of, and yet everything else not quite so much. So we'll put the head back on, and then I want to talk about this cup a little bit. I will say that, you know, there's nothing wrong with the way the head assembly thread's on there. It seems to be okay. It's not that loose, that bad. It's pretty normal stuff. You know, It seals with a rubber O-ring, so, you know, you might have to replace those in the future. Now, let's talk about that cup. Some of you already know I'm not a big fan of cups that screw in the top of my airbrush. And I have a couple that I like that do that, but I kind of forgive them for being a cheap airbrush. However, the size of that hole that threads into there and how difficult it's going to be to have to get in here and clean this airbrush. As you can see, that is tiny, but even more so, this hole being there, and you can feel the ridge where this threaded piece threads into the cup. This is definitely not a good sign. And that hole is so tiny that that's going to be a problem for anybody who's trying to spray thicker paints. It's just not going to flow paint through fast enough to be able to spray out doing some of your priming and things like that, base coverage, which is a big complaint to me because these are going to be targeted towards, you know, the typical, you know, consumer who's going to shop for an airbrush. There's going to be somebody probably interested in modeling. They're probably not artists going to hobby or Harbor Freight to get an airbrush. So they're mostly going to be, you know, hobbyists and do-it-yourselfers, maybe a little bit, but for the most part, I would say it's probably going to be guys trying to, you know, spray models or trying to do touch-up work, which that an airbrush is completely unsuitable to do touch-up work on cars, guys. But yeah, so let's look at it. You know, you heard what I had to say. Build quality is not a strong suit of this airbrush. Let's see how this thing sprays. So I loaded up my normal paint, what I normal mix of paint for me, and to see how we're going to do, as you can see, it's a little bit speckly there. Nothing real bad. It just means it's not going to deal with the thicker paints that I like to work with immediately. And as you can tell, the line quality doesn't look very good. So we're going to reduce it down a little bit more and see if we can clean that up. And we added a little bit of reducer in there. That helped a little bit, but it's still not got stellar line quality. But I'm going to practice around, play around with it just a little bit before I try to thin it even more. So I reduced it a little bit more, back flushed, and then promptly splashed paint into my face when I was back flushing, which I would assume is because the airbrush has that small hole, but that's not a fault of the airbrush. So I was able to clean up that line a little bit, but still nothing that I'm really happy with. The airbrush performs responsively, but the line quality is not that good, and I'm really struggling here, guys. And as you know, I do a lot of painting with a lot of different airbrushes. So not real good performance there. All right, so my final thoughts on this. I'm sad I spent my own money on it, but I'm not necessarily sad because I do this so that you guys can see what's out there. And, you know, I make a living with painting and art, so I have a budget for this stuff. So I spent my money so that you don't have to. I would not in any way, shape, or form recommend this airbrush. If you're looking for some budget airbrushes that aren't so bad, there are others out there. The Timber Tech that I've reviewed elsewhere is so many miles ahead of this, it's not even funny. And this is a pretty decent airbrush. This is not. And this is sometimes what happens is occasionally you'll get somebody review one of these, they'll get a good one. And this can happen with some of the cheap airbrushes. They'll get one good sample and, you know, so somebody might like this airbrush. They'll be like, hey, you know, worked great for me. But then half of them come out and they're junk. And the build quality is really, really low and just in an unacceptable way. And I'll probably hear some complaints about me being negative, and I don't like to be negative, but I don't want to see people wasting their money on this. And I think the market that this is for is not going to be suitable for the people, and they're going to be completely disappointed with what they get. That's my thoughts on it. Anyway, guys, I'm Bill Kennedy with the Airspace. That's going to be a wrap. I hope y'all got something out of it. You know, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye.